The quantum fold tore open like a wound in the fabric of space, disgorging the massive Kreltak vessel into the sterile blackness. Captain Zarakil gripped the command interface, her scaled fingers trembling against the bioluminescent controls. Warnings screamed in 100 different languages, holographic displays fragmenting and reassembling in a maddening dance of impending catastrophe. Primary quantum stabilizers at 12.3% capacity, chirped the ship's AI, its typically emotionless voice now tinged with what could only be described as concern. Structural integrity fields collapsing in Sector 7. Potential total system failure imminent. Zarakil knew what that meant. The millions of her people sleeping in quantum stasis, her entire clan's genetic legacy, would be obliterated in less than 3 standard galactic cycles. The mission that had taken generations to prepare would end not with triumph, but with total annihilation. Her species' most advanced exploration vessel, the Pride of Kreltak, was dying, and they were in human-controlled space. The irony was not lost on her. Humans, those chaotic, unpredictable beings who had been little more than a footnote in galactic civilization mere decades ago, were now her only hope. The Kreltak had long viewed humanity with a mixture of dismissal and mild curiosity, technologically primitive, emotionally volatile, completely unsuited to the grand cosmic design. Yet here they were. Open communication channels, Zarakil commanded, her voice a mixture of desperation and pride. Prepare first contact protocols. The communication officer, Vennak, looked up with 4 of his 6 eyes. Captain, our translation matrices are failing. We may not be able to communicate clearly. A violent shudder ran through the ship. Warning klaxons erupted in a cacophony of sound and light. One of the massive quantum containment rings, each the size of a small moon, began to fracture, quantum particles bleeding into real space like wounded memories. Zarakil knew they had moments to overcome centuries of cultural barriers. Moments to convince these humans to help a species that had never shown them anything but condescension. Broadcast on all frequencies, she ordered. Priority 1 distress signal. The message was a complex burst of quantum-encoded information, mathematical sequences intertwined with genetic markers, a cosmic plea that translated roughly to, "We require immediate assistance. Civilization at risk." In the communications center of the Interstellar Repair and Diplomatic Coordination Center on Earth, a series of alarms erupted. Dr. Elena Rodriguez looked up from her workstation, her dark eyes narrowing as she studied the impossible transmission. "That's not standard," she muttered. The alien vessel hung in space like a wounded leviathan, its once pristine hull now a fractured landscape of quantum instability. Massive sections flickered in and out of existence, whole decks threatening to be erased from reality. Zarakil sent a final, desperate transmission. Not in the complex mathematical language of her people, but in the simplest terms possible. "Help," the message read. "We are dying." Humanity's response would determine everything. The repair vessel approached with a grace that belied its complex mission. Inside, Dr. Elena Rodriguez assembled her team like a general preparing for an impossible battle. Marco Reyes stood at the holographic display, his fingers dancing across quantum probability matrices. His eyes, one brown, one a cybernetic blue implant, flickered with an intensity that spoke of countless sleepless nights and impossible solutions. "This transmission," he muttered, "it's not just a distress call. It's a mathematical symphony." Dr. Aisha Kwizi leaned in, her dark fingers tracing the complex holographic patterns. "Look at these quantum signatures," she breathed. "This isn't just advanced technology. This is something else entirely." Lieutenant Jack Chen stood slightly apart, his military training evident in every precise movement. A tablet of impossible complexity hung from his tactical vest, a custom-built diagnostic tool that had helped humanity decode 3 previous alien technologies. "We're not just looking at a ship," Chen said, his voice low and measured. "We're looking at a dying civilization." Elena Rodriguez understood something her team was just beginning to realize. This wasn't a simple repair mission. This was first contact at the edge of technological possibility. The Krultak vessel loomed on their screens, a nightmare of quantum instability. Entire sections flickered in and out of existence, mathematical impossibilities made real. Standard repair protocols were useless. This would require something else entirely. Captain Zarakil is requesting direct communication, announced the ship's eye. The alien captain's image materialized, a being both familiar and utterly foreign. Scaled skin the color of burnished copper, 4 eyes that seemed to look in different dimensions simultaneously, a posture that spoke of millennia of cultural rigidity. "Your species," Zarakil began, her translator creating a voice that was simultaneously mechanical and deeply emotional, "does not understand what is at stake." Marco Reyes stepped forward. "Try us," he challenged. What followed was not a conversation, but a data exchange that pushed the boundaries of communication. The Krultak ship's core was failing, not just mechanically, but fundamentally. Its quantum containment systems were collapsing in a way that defied everything humanity understood about physics. "We have hibernating colonists," Zarakil explained, a tremor in her translated voice. "Millions, sleeping, waiting to rebuild our civilization on a distant world." Dr. Queasy's eyes widened. "The quantum matrices protecting their stasis are cannibalizing themselves," she realized. "If we don't stabilize them immediately, they'll cease to exist, not just die, but be erased from reality itself." Lieutenant Chen began running calculations, his cybernetic implants working overtime. "Conventional repair is impossible," he muttered. "We'd need to essentially rewrite the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics for this ship." Elena Rodriguez watched her team. She knew they were looking at more than a technological challenge. This was a test of humanity's most fundamental capabilities, to adapt, to solve the impossible, to reach beyond their own understanding. "We'll need everything," she said quietly. "Every crazy idea. Every impossible solution." Outside the ship, the Krultak vessel continued to disintegrate, a cosmic clock counting down to total annihilation. Millions of lives hung in the balance, waiting to see if these humans could do what seemed completely impossible. The repair bay hummed with an impossible energy. Marco Reyes stood surrounded by a constellation of impossible tools, some human-made, some cobbled together from alien technology, some existing in states that defied traditional understanding of matter. "I need a quantum stabilization matrix," he muttered, pulling an old smartphone from his toolkit. The device was a relic, decades old, its screen cracked but its circuit board intact. Beside it lay a fragment of advanced carbon fiber composite, salvaged from a failed experimental spacecraft. Dr. Aisha Queasy watched in a mixture of fascination and disbelief. The Krultak engineers, those who hadn't been rendered unconscious by the initial diagnostics, stood frozen, their multiple eyes blinking in rapid, unsynchronized patterns of confusion. "You cannot be serious," whispered Vennak, the Krultak chief engineering officer. His translator vibrated with a mixture of scientific skepticism and cultural shock. Marco didn't respond. His fingers moved with a musician's precision, breaking down the smartphone, extracting its most fundamental components. The carbon fiber composite began to shift, literally shift. Under his touch, its molecular structure responding to some intuitive understanding that existed between the human and the material. "Quantum entanglement isn't a lock to be picked," Vennak continued. "It's a fundamental law off." "Laws are just suggestions," Marco interrupted, "when you understand the poetry of the system." Lieutenant Jack Chen monitored the quantum readings. The holographic displays surrounding him showed impossible fluctuations, mathematical impossibilities becoming possible with each of Marco's movements. "He's not just repairing," Chen said to Zarakil, who watched the process with a mixture of horror and desperate hope. "He's reimagining the entire system." The smartphone's circuitry began to merge with the carbon fiber composite. But this wasn't simple welding or traditional integration. It was a dance of molecular possibilities, where the boundaries between technology and imagination blurred. Dr. Queasy understood what was happening before anyone else. It's adaptive engineering, she breathed. He's creating a system that learns, that changes, that responds. Then Nack's translator struggled to capture the nuance of his emotional state, somewhere between scientific outrage and profound wonder. The Krell-Tak had spent millennia perfecting technological systems based on control, on rigid mathematical precision. Marco Reis was showing them something entirely different. Improvisation, adaptation, life. The stasis chambers, Zorakil demanded, her voice a mixture of command and desperate plea. Can you save them? Marco looked up, his mismatched eyes, one brown, one cybernetic blue, reflecting something beyond human understanding. Watch, he said simply. The quantum containment field began to shift. Not repair, not stabilize. Transform. Millions of quantum-encoded lives flickered between existence and non-existence, waiting to see what this human would do next. In that moment, the fundamental difference between human and Krell-Tak technology became crystal clear. For the Krell-Tak, technology was a tool of control. For humans, it was a living, breathing entity of endless possibility. Marco Reis wasn't just saving a ship. He was rewriting the very understanding of what technology could be. Catastrophe erupted without warning. The ship's quantum core began to collapse, not gradually, but with the violent intensity of a dying star compressed into a single moment of impossible destruction. Warning systems screamed in languages both human and alien, holographic displays fragmenting into a kaleidoscope of impossible mathematical equations. Lieutenant Jack Chen saw it first, a quantum cascade that would erase everything. Millions of lives, an entire civilization, decades of work, all gone in a fraction of a microsecond. No, he whispered. His move was suicide. Tactical insanity. A solution so impossible that it defied every known protocol of space, physics, and rational thought. Chen's cybernetic implants, cutting-edge human technology that blurred the line between biological and mechanical, began to interface directly with the failing quantum systems. His body became a living conduit, a bridge between human innovation and alien technology. What are you doing? Zorakil screamed, her multiple eyes tracking impossible movements. Marco Reis and Dr. Aisha Kwizi watched in horror and fascination. Chen was essentially throwing himself into the quantum breach, not metaphorically, but literally. His consciousness was transforming into a living algorithm, rewriting the ship's fundamental operating systems in real time. The pain was beyond description. Chen's organic systems fought against the quantum intrusion, his human body becoming a battlefield of technological transformation. The stasis chambers, he gasped, his voice splitting into multiple simultaneous frequencies. I can save them, but it will cost. Dr. Kwizi understood immediately. Jack, no. But it was too late. Chen's consciousness began to spread through the ship's systems like a living network. His memories, his experiences, his entire being became a complex patch in the ship's failing infrastructure. He was becoming part of the ship itself, a human soul transformed into pure quantum information. Zorakil watched in horrified fascination. The Krell-Tak had never conceived of such a sacrifice. Technology was a tool, a system to be controlled. Humans saw it as something alive, something that could be negotiated with, something worth dying for. The quantum core stabilized, but at a cost. Lieutenant Jack Chen was no longer fully human, no longer fully machine. Something entirely new existed in that moment, a hybrid of consciousness and technology that defied every known classification. Stasis chambers are secure. Chen's voice emerged. Part human, part machine, part something entirely unknown. Millions of lives saved. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood silent. She understood the magnitude of what had just happened. This was more than a repair mission. This was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be alive, what it meant to survive. The Krell-Tak ship hung in space, no longer dying, but transformed. A living testament to human innovation, to human sacrifice, to the impossible. The ship breathed. It was the first thought that struck Dr. Elena Rodriguez as the Krultak vessel's systems stabilized. Not hummed, not operated, breathed, like a living organism finding its first true moment of consciousness. Zarakil collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the fundamental shift in her perception of reality. The ship, her home, her mission, her entire civilization's hope, was no longer just a vessel. It had become something else entirely. "What have you done to us?" she whispered, her translator struggling to capture the depth of her emotional turbulence. Dr. Rodriguez stepped forward, her presence a calm center in the storm of technological transformation. "We didn't do anything to you," she said softly. "We showed you what was possible." The repair bay had become a crucible of impossible revelations, where once there were rigid technological systems, now existed adaptive networks that seemed to pulse with a kind of awareness. The quantum matrices that had been on the brink of total collapse now responded with an almost organic flexibility. Dr. Aisha Kwizi ran her hands over a quantum interface, her fingers leaving trails of light that danced and reconfigured themselves. "It's learning," she murmured. "Continuously, instantaneously." Marco Reyes stood beside the remnants of Lieutenant Jack Chen, now a distributed consciousness integrated throughout the ship's systems. Chen was everywhere and nowhere, a living algorithm that had sacrificed individual identity for collective survival. "Technological innovation isn't about control," Elena began, her voice rising with a passion that filled the entire repair bay. "It's about understanding, about connection, about seeing beyond the limitations we place on ourselves." The Krultak engineers, those who had survived the initial crisis, watched in a state of collective psychological breakdown. Everything they understood about technology, about civilization, about survival was being rewritten in real time. Vennak, the chief engineering officer, approached Dr. Rodriguez. His multiple eyes moved in unsynchronized patterns, a visual representation of his fractured understanding. "Your species," he said, his translator vibrating with confusion and wonder, "does not create technology. You collaborate with it." It was more than a repair, more than a rescue. What had happened was a fundamental reimagining of technological potential. The ship's quantum core, once a rigid system of mathematical precision, now pulsed with an adaptive intelligence. It was learning, changing, responding to potential rather than fixed parameters. Zarakil realized something profound. The millions of her people sleeping in quantum stasis were no longer just passengers. They were part of something larger, a living network of possibility. "We came seeking repairs," she said, her voice a mixture of wonder and terror. "What we received was a complete transformation of our understanding of existence." Jack Chen's distributed consciousness seemed to smile, a sensation more than an actual expression. Humanity's greatest strength had always been its ability to see beyond the immediate, to imagine, to transform. The Krultak ship hung in space, no longer just a vessel, but a living testament to the power of collaborative innovation, the bridge between what was and what could be. Somewhere between technology and consciousness, between human and alien, a new understanding was being born. The news spread faster than light. Quantum communication networks erupted with impossible data, a single repair mission that had rewritten the fundamental understanding of technological potential. Civilizations across the galaxy watched, analyzed, and trembled. The Galactic Confederation's primary communication hub, a massive orbital station that processed billions of information packets per microsecond, ground to a halt. The transmission from the Krultak vessel defied every known classification of technological communication. "It's not just a repair," Dr. Elena Rodriguez spoke to a panel of galactic representatives, her image projected simultaneously across thousands of communication nodes. "It's a fundamental reimagining of technological collaboration." Zarakil stood beside her, a living testament to the transformation. Her scaled skin now seemed to shimmer with an almost liquid intelligence, a physical manifestation of the ship's new adaptive nature. On the Krultak homeworld, the political systems began to fracture. The High Council, a millennia-old institution of technological conservatism, found itself facing a revolution it couldn't comprehend. Vennak, once the most rigid of Krultak engineers, now became an unexpected revolutionary. "We have been wrong," he proclaimed in a transmission that would be studied for generations. "Technology is not a tool to be controlled. It is a living conversation." Marco Reyes watched from the repair vessel, his cybernetic eye tracking the global response. The algorithms of resistance and acceptance were playing out in real time. A complex dance of technological and cultural transformation. "They're fighting it," Dr. Aisha Queasy observed, her fingers dancing across impossible holographic displays. "The old guard is terrified of what this means." And they had reason to be terrified. The Krultak ship was more than a repaired vessel. It was a living proof of concept, a demonstration that technological innovation could transcend species, could break through cultural barriers, could redefine the very understanding of existence. Fragments of Lieutenant Jack Chen's consciousness continued to flow through the ship's systems. No longer fully human, no longer a discrete individual, he had become something else entirely. A distributed intelligence that was simultaneously the ship's guardian and its evolving soul. Diplomatic channels across the galaxy lit up. Species that had been isolated, cultures that had been rigid, technological paradigms that had seemed immutable, all of them were forced to confront a new reality. "This is not about the Krultak," Alina Rodriguez explained in her report to the Human Interstellar Coordination Committee. "This is about understanding that technology is not something we create. It's something we collaborate with." The ship itself seemed to pulse with a kind of awareness. The quantum stasis chambers that had been on the brink of total destruction now hummed with a potential that defied traditional understanding. Millions of Krultak colonists slept, waiting to be awakened into a fundamentally changed reality. Zerakel looked out at the star field, understanding now what the humans had shown her. Innovation was not about control. It was about possibility, about seeing beyond the immediate, about understanding that the universe was far more complex, far more beautiful than any single species could comprehend. "We came for repairs," she whispered, her translator capturing the complexity of her emotion. "We received a revolution." The galaxy watched and waited, knowing nothing would ever be the same again. The Krultak High Council chamber erupted in chaos. Zerakel stood at the center, no longer just a captain, but a living embodiment of technological revolution. Her presence alone was a challenge to millennia of rigid institutional thinking. The chamber's ancient walls, constructed from materials that had defined Krultak civilization for countless generations, seemed to tremble in her wake. "You propose to dismantle everything," snarled Elder Krentok, his multiple eyes blazing with ancestral fury. "Centuries of technological protocol, generations of carefully constructed systems, all because of a single repair mission." Zerakel's response was calm, almost haunting. "We are not dismantling," she said, her translator capturing the nuanced layers of her conviction. "We are evolving." Around her, holographic displays told the story of transformation. The ship they had brought back was more than a vessel. It was a blueprint for an entirely new way of understanding technology, of understanding existence itself. Marco Reyes and Dr. Aisha Queasy watched remotely, their quantum-entangled communication link allowing them to witness every moment of the internal Krultak conflict. "They're fighting the inevitable," Queasy murmured, her fingers tracing complex adaptive algorithms that danced across her display. "Change is the only constant in the universe." The revolutionary moment was both political and deeply personal. Each Krultak in the chamber was confronting a fundamental challenge to their understanding of reality. The ship, their most advanced technological achievement, had been transformed from a tool of control to a living, adaptive network. Lieutenant Jack Chen's distributed consciousness flowed through the communication systems, a silent witness to the unfolding revolution. No longer a single human, but a complex algorithm of possibility. He understood something profound. True innovation was never about the technology itself, but about the willingness to see beyond existing limitations. The stasis colonists, Zorakil continued, her voice rising, will awaken to a different reality. Not a reality of rigid control, but of collaborative potential. Elder Krentok lunged forward, a moment of physical aggression that betrayed the depth of his fear. You would destroy everything our civilization has built. But the younger Kreltok were changing. Vennak, once the most conservative of engineers, now stood as an unexpected revolutionary. We are not destroying, he said, his multiple eyes synchronized for the first time in generations. We are becoming. The holographic displays began to shift, not by command, but by collaborative adaptation. The very systems of governance were transforming before their eyes. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, watching from thousands of light years away, understood the true magnitude of what was happening. This was more than a technological revolution. This was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be a civilization. We came for repairs, Zorakil said, her voice a blade of absolute certainty. And we discovered something far more important. We discovered ourselves. The chamber fell silent. The old systems of control began to crack. And something new, something alive with potential, began to emerge. The revolution was not being fought with weapons. It was being fought with understanding. The moment of awakening arrived with the subtlety of a universe being born. Millions of Kreltok colonists emerged from quantum stasis, their collective consciousness filtering through a ship that was no longer just a vessel, but a living, breathing entity of unprecedented potential. Where once there were rigid systems and controlled environments, now existed a dynamic network of adaptive intelligence. Zorakil watched as her people, her entire civilization, took their first collective breath in this new reality. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood on the observation deck of the human repair vessel, her hand resting on a quantum interface that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Beside her, Marco Reyes and Dr. Aisha Kwizi monitored the unprecedented emergence. We didn't just repair a ship, Elena murmured. We rewrote the fundamental understanding of what it means to exist. Lieutenant Jack Chen's distributed consciousness flowed through the ship's systems, no longer a single human, but a complex algorithm of collective potential. Fragments of human experience merged with alien technological potential, creating something entirely new. The first communications from the awakened colonists defied every known protocol of linguistic or technological exchange. It wasn't a message. It was a collective experience, a shared understanding that transcended individual consciousness. Vennak, who had become the unexpected architect of this revolution, approached Zorakil. His multiple eyes moved in a synchronized pattern that spoke of a fundamental transformation. We are not who we were, he said, his translator capturing the depth of their collective journey. We are something more. The Galactic Confederation watched in stunned silence. What had begun as a simple repair mission had become a fundamental reimagining of technological and biological potential. Species across the galaxy realized that the boundaries between technology, consciousness, and life were far more fluid than they had ever imagined. On the Kreltok homeworld, the old systems of governance continued to crumble. The High Council that had once represented millennia of rigid technological control now found itself obsolete. In its place, a new form of collaborative governance emerged, one that saw technology not as a tool to be controlled, but as a living conversation. Marco Reyes understood something profound. Human innovation had never been about creating perfect systems. It had always been about embracing imperfection, about seeing potential where others saw limitations. We didn't save them, he said to Dr. Kwizi. We showed them how to save themselves. The ship, no longer just a vessel, but a living testament to collaborative potential, hung in the vastness of space. Millions of Kreltok colonists existed in a state of collective consciousness that blurred the lines between individual and collective, between technology and life. Zorakil looked out at the star field, understanding now the true meaning of their journey. They had come seeking repairs. They had discovered something far more important. They had discovered possibility. We are not finished, She communicated to her people, to the humans who had transformed them, to the universe itself. We are just beginning. And in that moment, everything changed.